open your.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I think we'll start because anyway we are recording because it's very busy. So maybe recording can be sent to others who are not able to come. And I'll need your help as we go along. So give me a second. So what we'll do is we'll go through some of the endocrine cases as emergencies, and the rest of it as an can be done later on once the emergency is over. So we'll concentrate only the emergency part. So I might hurry up a little bit after that. Yeah. So endocrine emergencies. Let's go next. So the general themes, the treatment may be needed before the test result arrive. And you can think of people who are in adrenal insufficiency. If you don't give steroids, they will die. So you need to treat before you make a diagnosis. Symptoms are generally vague. Most of my patients in clinic are tired, and I'm also tired by the time I finish the clinic, so that makes two of us. So that's mainly endocrinology for us. Do not forget the history of menstrual cycles and erectile dysfunction. Now, these things, out of modesty, people sometimes miss it, but then the vital clue may be there. So don't forget those history and also examine breasts and testes if you are thinking endocrinology. Otherwise, again, you will miss the clues. And examine visual fields. They are best examined with red pins so they can capture maximum problems that are already there with the patient. So let's start with this person, and I'll give you clues one by one. And the moment you get an idea what it could be, it doesn't have to be the accurate diagnosis because I'm not giving you full information anyway. But I just want to know what your thoughts are as we go and proceed. So just put it in the chat box so that it is more fun, more interactive, and I know what you are thinking. So a 60-year-old man has come to hospital with confusion. There is history of smoking and the sodium is 120. Any thoughts? Put it in the chat box if you've got access to the team chat box. Anything you are thinking. The first thing we do, or we should do, when somebody comes with low sodium is to look for drugs, whether any of the medications is causing problems. So, oh yes, good. So somebody has said HN. So Hossam is saying SIADH. Well done. But before you diagnose SIADH, we need to think about are there any medications, which some of them do cause SIADH. So thiazides, anti-epileptics, antidepressants, and proton pump inhibitors. Particularly proton pump inhibitor nowadays almost everybody is on, and therefore it is difficult to make another diagnosis once you have that diagnosis. Okay, more clues. The volume status, the person is euvolemic. How have they decided euvolemic? Anything in the chat box? How do you decide whether a person is hypovolemic or euvolemic? Because you make critical decision based on that, isn't it? So in Southampton, when I was a registrar, the renal physicians were, oh yes, so somebody's writing BP and pulse. What in BP? So I'm looking for more specific thing that, oh yes, somebody is saying urine output, but many people are in Hastings are on diapers or doubly incontinent, so we can't tell by urine output. Anything else more objective? So I was telling you my Southampton story. So next day morning, renal physicians were on call and they said, well, the person is in renal failure. How much fluid you have given? So that's the main thing you will be asked by ITU and the renal physicians. But for that, you need to know what's the volume status. Any more thoughts? There are more clues I'm giving. Plasma osmolality is 250 and the urine osmolality is 500. So because your thoughts already started on SIADH, this would be in keeping with SIADH. So that's well done. It is in line with that. But of course, this is in the context that the patient must be euvolemic. So we are still waiting for somebody to tell me how you decided the patient was euvolemic. And the urine sodium is 42. So anything above 20 is consistent. Above 40 is more secure for diagnosis of SIADH. So Hossam said that SIADH was the diagnosis, so that would be in keeping with that. And the chest X-ray has been requested. So the answer I was looking for the euvolemic state is lying standing blood pressure, because that tells me whether the person has got postural hypotension. In that case, I would not fluid restrict thinking SIADH, but would rather give some normal saline and then recheck sodium. So that's a mistake you should never make, yeah? But is quite often made and very commonly made. So the differential diagnosis. So what's the differential diagnosis? So Sam, you said SIADH because of the person
low sodium.
Yeah.
The urine.
What's the cause?
Because there's there's no sodium reabsorption in the kidneys.
Yeah, what's the etiology?
Sorry?
What is the etiology? What is the cause of SIADH?
It could be from the thiazides.
Yeah, no, he's not on thiazides. I just said.
Oh, he's not on thiazides.
The only clue is smoking, you see. So the diagnosis is?
It could be lung cancer, lung.
Good. So that's what the diagnosis is. So check the volume status for euvolemia, because SIADH is euvolemic. If it is hypovolemic like dehydration, then you have to give some fluids. If it is hypervolemia like congestive cardiac or liver or kidney failure, then treat the cause. Then look for where the sodium is going. So in SIADH, it goes in urine. But if you have an obvious clue, like in one patient, healthcare assistants came after 3-4 days to us when we were going around and said, do you realize that this lady's colostomy bag is filling every 3-4 hours? So basically the sodium was going there, and that was the reason for her low sodium. Similarly, if the skin will be more obvious. If the skin is exfoliating, then the sodium might be going there. So that could be a Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Then you have to look for any drugs that can cause SIADH. You have to discontinue and give normal saline, but we have already said in the clues that there are no drugs. The important thing that I want you to always remember is that there are 3 conditions that can mimic SIADH. One is hypothyroid, one is adrenal failure, and third is renal failure. So whenever you will call an endocrine registrar low sodium, what should I do? They will say, have you checked thyroid function tests and adrenal tests before proceeding with the diagnosis of SIADH? Yeah. So remember those important steps. Diagnose SIADH only after considering all the above. How will you treat it? If it is mild, chronic, and asymptomatic, then correct hypovolemia with normal saline if there is hypovolemia. And we already discussed how you will confirm hypovolemia. Just do a lying standing blood pressure. And if you can't do lying standing blood pressure, is there anything else you can do to confirm whether the patient is dehydrated? Can you ask a question? What could that question be?
Turgor.
Sorry?
The skin turgor.
Yeah, but skin turgor also, we are coastal town. Skin is dry because of us being in seaside. So skin is not 100% reliable. It is reliable in children, but not in elderly. So what would you see? So the question you need to ask is, are you thirsty? So if the patient is thirsty, then is more likely, yeah, one of you is saying dizziness, which is also right, but that will be, yeah, that is also a good question actually. And that will give you an idea whether the patient is having postural hypotension. But if the patient is lying in bed, can't stand, then you don't get that clue. For that, you'll have to just ask, are you thirsty? And you must have heard of that story, I think 2 years ago went viral, from St. George's, where a patient from a surgical ward called an ambulance for water. And when ambulance people came, then everybody checked the situation and found that the person was actually dehydrated and they were fluid restricting him, thinking SIADH. And then people were making fun of these doctors. They don't know whether the person needs fluid or not. So never make that mistake in future. Address the cause if possible. Is it a drug? Is it a pneumonia which is causing SIADH? And then restrict to 1 to 1.5 liter if it is SIADH. And if it is severe, and if it is symptomatic. So sometimes you'll get a call from research, the person is having seizures and the sodium is 100, what shall we do? So we have to give, in that case, hypertonic saline. The one that is available locally is 2.7%. There are various preparations available. And the way we are currently giving is in line with European and Endocrine Society guidelines. So just give 150 ml in 20 minutes. Ideally by central line, but a big bore line will also be okay. And repeat the sodium after you have given it and check by blood gases, because otherwise lab will take a lot of time. And if it is not risen by 5 millimole, give another 150 ml and keep giving every 20 minutes until the sodium is risen by 5 millimole by venous blood gases. Check the sodium by machine at least 4 hourly after that to ensure that you don't correct more than 10 millimole in the first 24 hours. Because what will happen if that happens? Any thoughts on the chat box? While you are thinking, I'll tell you another story, because stories are important. Oh, edema. Where edema? So yeah, cerebral edema, but that would be if you are giving too much normal saline as a fluid. But what is more, if you are correcting, what the correction causes? So I'll tell you some more clues in a different. Oh yes, you got the diagnosis now. So myelination. So it is demyelination, not myelination. And what does that demyelination do? So that will be your most important clinical problem that you might come across. So Nonia is saying myelination. So what would demyelination do? So basically what you are doing is you are correcting sodium. So sodium is going down in the extracellular fluid. In the brain, it is still higher, lower, and you are correcting outside. So the outside, the blood-brain barrier has become more concentrated. So what will it do? It will draw more water from brain. So what will happen to brain? Brain will become dry. So that is why it causes dry brain or demyelination. And the person, what happens to the person? What's this condition called? So I'll tell you this story. So a patient, when I was working in Southampton, a GP called and said this patient has got a T4 of 10, which is a little bit lower than normal, and TSH is high at 15. What shall I do? So what did the registrar say? You got normal or low T4 and high TSH. What would you do? Put it in the chat box. So the advice was to give some thyroxine, isn't it? So so she was a lady working in Southampton University. She took thyroxine and then went to Namibia and collapsed there. And they checked sodium Sodium was 102. What happened? Why did the lady's sodium suddenly after thyroxine went to 92? And then they gave saline, obviously, to improve her sodium, and she could not move anything below neck. So she has developed this complication now. What is the condition called? Cerebral pontine myelinosis, isn't it? So that is locked in syndrome. So a person can't move anything below neck and can only move eyes. And people have written actually books by the movement of eyes. So it is it's an important and a dramatic complication and something worth remembering. Comes in exam, comes in PACES if you're going for membership exam, and also clinically also when we treat, it can be a major issue if you correct it too quickly. What was the connection with thyroid in the lady I mentioned from Southampton? The thyroid can burn whatever is there in the body. So it burnt whatever the cortisol was. So she was in Addisonian crisis and therefore sodium went down. So what is the message from this story? Never treat thyroid condition before you have excluded any borderline adrenal condition. Otherwise you will precipitate adrenal insufficiency and of course this complication. So the lady was then moved, or actually air ambulance shifted from Namibia to Southampton ITU and made full recovery actually. So it always stayed with me as a story. So what is the sodium you are trying to target? So it should go to 120. We don't target more than that. And then what do? After that, you can give some small fluids and normal saline or even salt. So further management of SIADH may need continued fluid restriction. You can give demeclocycline. You can give tolvaptan. So these are the drugs which work on ADH action. And then what would you do? You need to find out what is the cause of SIADH. So chest X-ray, CT chest abdo-pelvis, and octreotide scan. And this case was, as you have said, was a lung cancer. What kind of lung cancer gives rise to SIADH? Put it in the chat box.
Small cell lung cancer. Small cell.
Yeah. Good. So small cell, yeah. So yeah. So Catalin and of course Hossam both got it right. So small cell cancer, so that can cause it. Okay. So so you got the flavor now. So give me the diagnosis this time. It's nothing tricky. Whatever comes to your mind, just put it in the chat box. A young lady with query gastroenteritis, 28-year-old, Afro-Caribbean, has come with anorexia, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea for 4 days. She has been losing weight and hasn't had menstrual cycles for last 2 months. Any thoughts? Put it in the chat box. She has been tired for 6 months. Hyperthyroid, okay. Hyperthyroid can cause some of this and weight loss, but usually hyperthyroid will cause polymenorrhea. And what is the connection with Afro-Caribbean? Hypothyroid, somebody is saying, but hypothyroid will cause weight gain, not weight loss. Any other clues? Any other suggestions? Blood pressure is 100/60. And there is postural fall. And the pulse is 90. So you got the diagnosis now, yeah? What's the diagnosis? And the TSH is 12. What is the diagnosis? So yeah, tentatively you will think, oh, is it hypothyroid, which is the mistake that was made in the first case, and thyroxine was given. And the diagnosis was sodium is 124. Oh yes, you got it now. Addison's disease or adrenal failure, because we don't yet know whether it is because of antibodies, which is what Addison's is. But we know that it is adrenal failure because sodium is 124, potassium is 5.4 and urea is 20. So low sodium, high potassium, high urea, and in 20% of cases high calcium. They all happen in people with adrenal failure. So the differential diagnosis is it could be primary or secondary to pituitary problems, and the primary one, the volume will be low, potassium and pigmentation will be high. If it is autoimmune, you will have anti-adrenal antibody positive. If it is an infection or hemorrhage, it is sometimes seen in post-meningococcal cases. What is it called in post-meningococcal cases? Put it in the chat box. So the story will be a lady who has lives in a girls' hostel and come with fever and patches on arms and legs. What kind of patches are they? And yes, so Waterhouse-Friderichsen, Osam is saying, well done. So it is Waterhouse-Friderichsen syndrome. It is adrenal hemorrhage due to severe infection. I had one patient, I might have told you this story before, in Sunderland. Yeah, a non-blanching rash. Osam is saying, well done. So it is a non-blanching rash. How do you find out whether it is blanching or non-blanching in AAU? So use a tumbler, which might be there in doctor's room. Yeah, glass test. Yeah, and put it and press it, and then you will know, because it is a bleeding inside skin, which is a problem. So I was telling you about the Sunderland story. A man came with swelling in the arm. On Friday, we sent some blood tests. Monday, we came back and asked the nurse, how is that man? They said the person died over the weekend. So we were quite puzzled why the patient died. So post-mortem was done, and what did they find? They found that there were adrenal hemorrhages because of the cellulitis in the arm. So severe sepsis can give rise to adrenal hemorrhage, and the patient can die. So what could we have done differently? There was sodium going a little bit lower on Friday. If we had picked it up, we could have told the team over the weekend to recheck sodium and potassium. And if there was further deterioration, somebody might have thought of adrenal insufficiency and given steroids, and the patient would be living. So these are critical points or learning points which you should always remember. If it is secondary to ACTH deficiency, then volume and potassium may be normal, so there will be no postural fall in blood pressure. It is usually seen with prolonged steroid use or isolated or hypopituitarism. So these are the cases. How do you manage? Management is simple. Just give some normal saline, dextrose, take samples for cortisol and ACTH, give some hydrocortisone. And then, of course, you will ask the endocrine people, and they will do 9 AM cortisol ACTH or short synectin test. And the patient may need ultrasound, CT, MRI of adrenal and antibody and adrenal antibody test. What else did I want to say in this one? So another scenario in which this kind of problem may come until you are on call and you make the diagnosis is a story of my let's say 15-year-old boy who goes for his GCSE or A-level exam, but every time there is an exam, he gets pain abdomen and he comes back home. The GP is thinking malingering and is referring him to psychiatrists. When he comes home, of course, the family takes him to A&E, and then he gets better. And everybody is thinking he's just trying to avoid exam. Is that right? What could be actually happening? Any suggestions from you in the context in which we are talking? So the actual diagnosis in this boy is Addison's disease. And because of stress of the maths exam, he always gets his available cortisol completely gone, and therefore he starts having pain abdomen. What is the connection of pain abdomen? So there are very few medical conditions that present as pain abdomen, and this is one of them. So adrenal insufficiency can come as pain abdomen. What is the other medical condition that wrongly goes to surgeons and sometimes gets operated also? And it is a medical condition, should not be going to surgeons, but because all pain abdomen go to surgeons, it goes to surgeons. And what do surgeons do? They do surgery. So it gets operated upon and then they refer to medics. Is there any medical cause? And then of course you make the diagnosis. What is the diagnosis? Put it in the chat box. Medical diseases presenting as pain abdomen. Okay, while you are thinking, let me go to the third case. A case of headache. Oh, DKA, well done. So DKA, if you go in BMJ case report, which is actually a good resource for learning, and write DKA presenting as acute pain abdomen, you will find many case reports where people have said that DKA patients had by mistake exploratory laparotomy, and then somebody looked at the blood glucose levels and they were very high, and then they did ketones. Because blood glucose can sometimes be only 11, but the person can still be in DKA. So how will you pick it up? Only if you think of it and then do ketone levels, and then only you will pick it up, not by glucose levels. Increasingly, people are coming with normal glucose level but DKA, particularly because nowadays we are using drugs which can reduce glucose, but they can still cause ketoacidosis, called SGLT2 inhibitors. You know about them, yeah? So dapagliflozin, empagliflozin, canagliflozin, anybody on these drugs will have DKA with normal glucose. So that is the second condition. What is the third condition? Okay, so let's go to the case of headache. 30-year-old Caucasian male, he is presented with severe headache. CT scan is normal and lumbar puncture is showing few lymphocytes. He is mentioning erectile dysfunction on specific questioning. What's the diagnosis? You got your main clues. And there are visual field defects in the periphery. You got the diagnosis now, yeah? Yes, pituitary adenoma. Why has pituitary adenoma come like this suddenly? Because all tumors are supposed to come slowly, isn't it? Cancers, they come, or tumors, they can come acutely in two situations. Which are those two situations? And what is this condition called in pituitary adenoma? Then you'll get 100% marks or some. You got 90% now. Sodium is 124. So craniopharyngioma, yeah, that's also sort of pituitary tumor or some. But why suddenly presenting? Sodium is 124. And the differential, of course, is pituitary apoplexy. So whenever in a tumor you have a secondary change, either on an infection or a hemorrhage, then it presents acutely. So you must have seen cases of lung cancer also coming and being diagnosed on your take. Why? Because they did have some problem, and then you ask, well, have you been losing weight? He said, yeah, I've been losing weight. So there was a slow progression, but the acute decompensation was because of either infection or hemorrhage. This, in this situation of pituitary, is called pituitary apoplexy. Hemorrhage or infection in a pituitary adenoma. When would you suspect? When there is sudden onset headache with visual or field disturbances and pituitary function abnormalities like low sodium. Sodium is low because pituitary can't make ACTH. If pituitary can't make ACTH, then the adrenal glands can't make cortisol. And as we have seen before, cortisol is important for sodium and blood pressure. What is the order of involvement of pituitary function abnormalities or loss in cases of pituitary disease? So the sex hormones, for some reason, go first, then growth hormone, then ACTH, then thyroid. Now, what is the significance of knowing this sequence of involvement of hormones in pituitary gland diseases? Can any of you guess? Put it in the chat box. What is the importance of knowing this? And discuss with the neurosurgeons urgently if there is visual loss or if there is a progressive course. And then, of course, you manage. Management, again, we are managing cortisol in both pituitary as well as adrenal problems. To take sample for cortisol, urgent treatment, normal saline, hydrocortisone 100 milligrams 6 hourly, neurosurgical transfer if needed, and subsequently, of course, the endocrinology will do the workup. FSH, LH, estrogen for the sex hormones, testosterone, T4 and TSH for thyroid hormone, growth hormone, and IGF. Yeah, so growth hormone first, LH, FSH. Yeah, but what is the importance of knowing that? So growth hormone and then 9 AM cortisol and ACTH. So these are the tests which will be done later on, and then MRI pituitary will be done, and then a short synectin test will be done later on. It takes 6 weeks for the adrenal to then atrophy after pituitary disease. So short synectin might be normal in acute cases. Yeah. So what is the pituitary adenoma? So this is an adenoma here between two cavernous sinuses, and carotid arteries, and these are structures passing through lateral wall of cavernous sinuses. So before I ask you a question there, I'll give you the answer of what is the importance of knowing that the sex hormones go first. The importance is that if you want to exclude a pituitary abnormality, you don't have to examine or ask any or do any blood test, but just ask one simple question. If it is a woman in front of you, all you need to ask is, are you having normal menstrual cycles? If they have normal menstrual cycles, then it is unlikely that she would have a pituitary abnormality. So it's a shortcut to then move on to other things that you want to go to. Similarly, in men, you can ask for erectile dysfunction, but it doesn't work in men so well. But in women, it works very well. So the lateral wall of cavernous sinus, what goes through lateral wall of cavernous sinus? So tumor, if it goes up, it compresses the optic chiasma, and therefore person can see straight but can't see the sides. So there will be bilateral peripheral visual field defects. But instead, if the tumor decides to go to the side, what will it do? What will it affect? Or sometimes it goes underneath. But the only thing that is important is vision. So that's why the question about vision is important. So if it goes to the side, what are the structures passing through the lateral wall of cavernous sinus? Anybody? Chat box. So third, fourth, and fifth one cranial nerve. Sixth passes through the cavernous sinus. Carotid artery also passes through cavernous sinus. Yeah. So all these structures can get affected if the tumor moves laterally. And if the cranial nerves, they get affected, what would happen? How will the eyes be? So if the third cranial nerve is affected, where will the eye be? So the eye is apparently toast. So it's a closed eye. And when you open the lid, where do you find the eye? So it's an unopposed action of fourth and sixth. What would it do? So down and out. So eye will be down and out. So those are the clues for third cranial nerve paralysis because of the pituitary tumor extending laterally. So let's go to the next question. A case of dehydration. A 50-year-old woman comes with polydipsia, polyuria, very unwell, GCS is 13, blood glucose is 4.5, and sodium is 160. What's the diagnosis? Put it in the chat box. Diabetes, which diabetes? Blood glucose is 4.2, 4.5. So it's not diabetes mellitus. What is it? Yeah, diabetes insipidus. Well done. So that is the differential diagnosis. This time the osmolality and plasma and urine is the other way around to SIADH. So urine osmolality is low and plasma osmolality is high. Plasma potassium is 3.5 and plasma calcium is 2.4. Why am I giving you this information in diabetes insipidus? What are the types of diabetes insipidus? How is potassium and calcium relevant? Any answers? Put it in the chat box. Yeah, so yes, so you got it right. So it could be nephrogenic or it could be cranial. So what is the relevance to potassium and calcium? So hypocalcemia and hypokalemia and hypercalcemia both can cause nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Yeah. So you got, I think you might have been involved with that lady who is admitted. We came in Dr. Muchi's take, and she's at the moment, I think, in Frankshaw ward with a calcium of calcium of 3.8, very high. So you would expect polydipsia, polyuria in her case because of the nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Abdominal examination, there are no lumps. Why am I talking about abdominal examination? What have abdominal lumps to do with diabetes insipidus? Any answers? Yes, renal mass. Yeah, anything else? What kind of renal mass? So adult polycystic kidney disease is typical. It comes in exam, and also when you touch the abdomen, there are lumps everywhere in the tummy, and that can cause diabetes insipidus. So confirm the diagnosis, estimate the water deficit, and then replace with 50% in the first 24 hours. Exclude nephrogenic causes like hypokalemia, hypercalcemia, lithium, adult polycystic kidney disease, sickle cell disease. Protect against complications like thrombosis risk. Consider precipitating factors like infection, inability to drink water like coma or a thirst center problem. So they sometimes precipitate diabetes insipidus or make it obvious or the diagnosis is made. So the last time I had a referral from a GP, the referral read, this patient has been drinking too much water and passing too much water for last 30 years. Can you please advise whether the person has got diabetes insipidus? So when I read the letter, I thought, why has the patient been referred after 30 years? Do you know? Can you put it in the chat box? So when the patient came, I said, what happened? So he said, I've always had this problem. I said, then why now you have come? He said, for 30 years, I was waking up at night and drinking water, maybe 3 to 4 times at night. But that's okay, I don't mind. But now I'm playing golf and I can't go from one golf hole to the other golf hole without going to the watering hole. So it was now affecting his professional life and entertainment or quality of life. And that is why he came to the hospital. So until now, what was he doing? He was drinking water. So what is the treatment of diabetes insipidus? Water. So he was treating himself, isn't it? There is one other situation in which you will make this diagnosis. So you will be attending a trauma call, and the nurse will come and tell you this person's catheter bag is filling every hour. And because you have done this meeting today, you make the diagnosis. Oh, I know what it is. It is diabetes insipidus. Now the patient is not able to drink water, he is unconscious. And therefore, his diabetes insipidus has got obvious or manifest or uncovered. So the cause could be a pituitary tumor, it could be an infection, it could be a hypopituitary, or it could be after surgery. What is the treatment? We give DDAVP, either 1 or 10 or 100, depending upon whether we are giving subcutaneous or nasal or oral. So let's go to the next one. A 50-year-old man with a new diagnosis of diabetes. Any thoughts? Put it in the chat box. He is overweight. He is weak. He is all pigmented. Cushing's, yeah, well done. So I can go through that quickly. Potassium is 2.5. Any other thoughts? He is on no drugs. Blood pressure is 190 by 110. Any other thoughts? Urine potassium is more than 20. So he's losing potassium in the urine. Blood gases pH is 7.55. Bicarb is 40. So there is alkalosis according to pH. When we look at the bicarb, we can explain the alkalosis. The CO2, of course, is in the opposite direction, so trying to compensate. So inadequately compensated metabolic alkalosis. What could be the reason? What's the differential? Of course, you have told Cushing's. Anything else? So that brings us to the approach of low potassium. Now, potassium and sodium is your bread and butter, isn't it? So if a person comes with low potassium, there are only two important things that you need to do. One, do a renin-aldosterone ratio. If the renin is low, then the diagnosis is either hyperaldosteronism due to Conn's or some other rare condition. And if the aldosterone is low, then it is Cushing's or licorice, which is sweet, sweets which people can sometimes take in excess. The other test that you have to do after having done renin-aldosterone, and if the renin is not low, is to check whether there is acidosis or alkalosis. If there is alkalosis, then it could be a Barter, Gitelman, or a diuretic use. And if it is acidosis, then it is renal tubular acidosis. So that's how you approach low potassium, yeah? So that way you'll be able to make all the diagnoses. So what are the features of Cushing's, which you have offered as a diagnosis? Bruising, supraclavicular pad of fat, buffalo's hump, we call it, central obesity, potato on sticks. So these are the clues how you can remember. Don't say this to the patient, he may not take it kindly. Purple stretch marks on the tummy, edema feet, high blood pressure, proximal myopathy, agitation, depression, and this is how the person will look. Now, many people walking around in Hastings will call. Okay, let me again get it. Okay. Right. So let's go to, yes, so you can see all the slides again, yeah. So SIADH, gastroenteritis, which turned out to be adrenal failure, headache, which was because of pituitary apoplexy, and then dehydration, which was diabetes insipidus, and the new diabetes was because of Cushing's, and hypokalemia can be because of Crohn's, and a 42-year-old female with SVT. So she has got palpitation, weight loss, tremors, and goiter. What's the diagnosis in the chat box? Hyperthyroid. Well done. So temperature is more than 40, pulse is more than 140, agitated, crackles in the lungs, nausea, vomiting. Of course, it is hyperthyroid. More specifically, if you want 100% marks, it is toxic storm. So precipitation can be because of thyroid surgery or withdrawal of antithyroid drugs or radioiodine treatment or iodine-rich food or postpartum or infections and sometimes surgeries. How do you treat? Carbimazole 20 milligram or PTU 250 milligram 4 hourly. Give some iodine, Lugols or potassium iodide. Propranolol 40 milligram 4 hourly. Hydrocortisone 100 milligram 6 hourly. Cooling blankets and paracetamol. And this is what acute thyrotoxicosis is like. It could be high T4 and T3 with suppressed TSH normally. And the commonest cause is Graves' disease, diagnosed by thyroid stimulating antibodies. Thyroiditis sometimes does it, and diagnosed by thyroid antibodies. And the treatment is again carbimazole. And this is how the eyes will look. So let's go to the next one. Give me the diagnosis as you did last time quickly. Hypertension in operation theater. What's the likely cause? You are being called, you are on call. Your colleague is calling you from operation theater. Patient has developed sudden, oh yes, good, you got the diagnosis, pheochromocytoma. Patient has developed sudden, very high blood pressure during hemicolectomy. Pulse rate is 130. Blood pressure is 230 by 120. Lactates are high. Glucose is high. Previous clues were there, but were probably not picked up. The patient was always anxious and panicky, and there were sweating episodes in the past. How do you do further workup? 24-hour urine catecholamines, plasma catecholamines, CT scan for adrenal mass, volume expansion by fluids, alpha blockade, phenoxybenzamine before beta blockade, otherwise you will create crisis. And this is where the tumor is. So well done on this one. Now tell me this one. 80-year-old lady with high calcium. Put it in the chat box. What could be the reason? Presented with nausea, vomiting, polyuria, as I mentioned before. So hyperpara, yes. So the first cause of high calcium without many other symptoms is primary hyperpara. Second cause is, put it in the chat box, primary hyperpara. Third cause is, put it in the chat box, primary hyperpara. So you get the theme now. The commonest cause is primary hyperpara. In this case, calcium is 3.0. You got one patient in hospital at the moment with 3.8. History of surgery for primary hyperpara. In this case, blood pressure 110 by 70 with postural drop, creatinine 150. What would you do next? So last time, what happened was that we had a lady and we were investigating for high calcium for 3 days until a healthcare assistant came and told us, have you seen her breast? We said, what is wrong with her breast? And then we examined the breast and there was a fungating mass coming out of breast. And the lady didn't want other people to know that she has got breast cancer. So exclude cancer somewhere. So high calcium and low sodium exclude cancer. Chest X-ray, severe hypercalcemia is 3 with dehydration or 3.5 with normal blood volume. Our lady is more than 3.5 in Frank Shaw ward, so she is severe, but we can't give her pamidronate, which is the treatment, because she is pregnant as well. So she is a bit tricky. Asymptomatic hypercalcemia is usually due to primary hyperparathyroid. Malignancy is usually evident before hypercalcemia is picked up, but should not be missed. How will you treat it? 4 to 6 liters of fluid over 24 hours. Hopefully that will sort my lady in Frankshaw. Otherwise, we will have to either take the risk and give pamidronate or consider surgery in second trimester. She is already in second trimester. Other drugs which we can give in specific conditions, steroids for vitamin D toxicity and sarcoid, calcitonin 0.5 subcutaneous BD is another option. Apparently doesn't cross placenta, so we are thinking of giving that also in our case. Hemodialysis is another way we can deal with it, and investigation for the cause. PTH, vitamin D, 24-hour urine calcium, creatinine, fractional excretion of calcium. These are the tests we do. And of course, there are other causes of hypercalcemia, myeloma and sarcoid. And we'll do the scans for any tumor cancers, sometimes thyrotoxicosis, and as I told, adrenal insufficiency can also cause high calcium, and HIV testing. So the last one, a case of low calcium, 55-year-old female, recent parathyroidectomy, calcium is 1.7. She has come with carpopedal spasm, seizures, vomiting, diarrhea, and prolonged QT interval. What are the signs you will find? Positive Chvostek sign, which is tapping on the facial nerve will cause spasm, and a positive Trousseau sign, which is blood pressure cuff above systolic for 3 minutes will lead to carpopedal spasm. This is all you need to know. How will you manage? If it is less than 1.9, you will have to give 10% solution of calcium gluconate. If it keeps dropping, then you will have to prepare an infusion and continuously give to the patient. Correct magnesium deficiency before correcting calcium. If chronic and asymptomatic, treat with oral calcium and vitamin D. What could be the causes? Parathyroid, and therefore you do bone profile, but of course low magnesium and low vitamin D will also cause similar things. So hypoparathyroid because of any reason. Hypomagnesemia is usually either renal or intestinal loss, vitamin D deficiency, and the PTH resistance. These are some of the causes of hypocalcemia because of parathyroid. So we finished in time, 1 minute to go. I hope you enjoyed my stories. I hope you remember the important Velcro points. I hope you do not diagnose SIADH without first excluding cortisol insufficiency, postural fall in blood pressure, and hypothyroidism. Okay. Any questions?